we're going to touch on a very important subject. There are a lot of people who have not only benefited, but have had actually some struggles with Alcoholics Anonymous and all the other anonymous groups that are out there, whether it be narcotics, cocaine, meth anonymous, so on and so forth. Tonight, I have Kevin Kuhlow with me. He's a licensed therapist here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Thanks for joining in tonight, Kevin.
It's really a pleasure to be here again, Dustin. It's really awesome to be here.
Thanks. I appreciate it. You and I have actually had this discussion in the past, and it was something that, I wanted to make sure that I was respectful of the program because I've used the program. It has been beneficial to me. And it was one of my first exposures to outside group therapy, group support. But with that, one, I think the most important things, that's a beautiful thing about the AA programs is that it's free. Somebody that doesn't know where to go, doesn't have any clue on where to start. There are so many meetings going on throughout the world at any given moment that somebody can simply step in, sit in the back row, listen in, understand, the process of AA, the 12-step program, and they can hear a story or two, and they can also potentially relate to others who have dealt with the struggle, who are still kind of battling it with very minimal sobriety time, and those that have lasted the duration, have 10, 15, 20, I've heard 30, 40 years worth of sobriety. And I think that that's powerful to let people know that, hey, it does work. There is opportunities to get and stay clean. And it doesn't cost a cent. Of course, they obviously are willing to accept donations, but it's not a requirement. And that allows somebody that maybe doesn't have access to, good healthcare services, insurance services that would provide them with, an intensive, maybe detox facility or some sort of other regimented plan that has a therapist involved with it. One of the other pros that I find with the AA community is that it's an instant community in your life. It's people who have been there, done that, who can understand what you're going through, can share stories. They're typically way more empathetic than somebody else who's never experienced the plight of addiction and how it wreaks havoc, personally, financially, socially, economically. And so you have immediate access to people, even off hours outside of meetings, that you can speak to on the phone, especially if you're struggling, in a given evening, for example. And so there's an instant massive support network. One of the other things that's nice about AA is that they have a set system. They have a 12-step program, and it has worked for roughly like 80 million people over at least 4 decades now that they've been actively serving the world. And it's something that if you follow, on top of that, they have a ton of literature out there. They have books to help you, get through the material, help you understand, and it does make you a better person when it's all said and done. It helps you understand yourself more. It helps you understand addiction. It also helps you just get to be the best version that you could possibly be. Kevin, what do you think about all that?
So, as we talk about this today, my feeling is that any tool that anybody can use, right, is if they can choose to use that and that gets them sober, I think it's going to be phenomenal. All right. So, AA has treated, it's been around for 80 years. It's treated millions of people that have been successful with the program. So a lot of the points that you made on, it's free, it's accessible. You can go online and look and find meetings that you can do virtual today to showing up in almost any time of the year. There's tremendous support around the holiday seasons when they're doing around the clock, very critical times for people who maybe have lost families in addiction and they don't have a lot of social support. It's phenomenal. It's really a great place for them to be during the holiday season. So there's all of these things. You can go any place in the world. I mean, there's cruise ships and they have AA meetings, and there's alcohol flowing. You probably need to go there for a lot of those, right? So it's accessible. It's free. It has, it's really based on some really solid, fundamental psychological principles as well, and you look at Carl Jung, one of the great psychiatrists who I love and a lot of his work, and he connected with AA, and he basically wrote a letter that the spirituality that so many people have problems with is actually needed for some of those in severe alcoholism or in any kind of substance use to help pull them through, right? It's the great letter that you can see in one of the AA books where it's coming to on this case was hopeless in his eyes, and now he's recovered, and what a great story, right? So, I think all of those things, the no cost, the accessibility is there. I think there's the key to me in what AA brings to the table or any of the social support programs is that sense of community. When you are in addiction, you lose your family, right? You disconnect from family, you disconnect from friends. It's a disease of isolation more than anything else. All right? It is isolation, and you've lost everything. And I think in today's world with cell phones and social media and all these components, people have lost the ability to connect. And they've lost the opportunity to connect. And so now you go in, you put somebody in who's in their addiction, and they don't have a social support system. What are they doing? They're flipping through they're drinking, they're flipping through their phone. They're disconnected from the world. They're playing Xbox. I've treated many clients, that's one of their big triggers. They sit and play Xbox and they talk to people they don't know, and they think they have a social life. And it's alarming, and I think it's a big problem in society. And I think that AA offers an opportunity for somebody to be around other people that are going through the same problem, other people that have been successful in the program, to show them that there's hope. So
I appreciate that. Great insight. So I've gone through many AA meetings. I've also participated in NA meetings. I've gotten up and have spoken about my life, how I got to the point of needing recovery, and there were a lot of things that resonated with me. But one of the most fascinating things is that still being in a recovery community, external of AAs, I've found that there are so many different ways in which people have come to their sobriety, and sometimes AA is not a part of that. Some of the concerns is that there is a rigidness, and whereas if people purely, maybe for example, only worked on their spirituality, that would help alleviate the need to be an addict, right? They start getting more involved with their church programs, for example.
Yep.
Some people, myself included, was that mental health was a huge thing for me, and it's not really discussed in anonymous meetings. I know that addressing my mental health and seeing a psychiatrist, seeing a psychologist, those things have been enlightening to me, and and just being on the right medications to manage some of those things has made life that much easier. The gravity of life isn't as heavy as it used to be when I was in my addiction. And some of that was purely because of mental health. And it's, there is a kind of a circular pattern, unfortunately, with addiction and mental health, because we know that addiction messes with brain receptors, it messes with dopamine, serotonin levels. And so it's a vicious cycle that, unfortunately, these chemicals get out of whack through an addiction, and they don't restabilize. And so you continue to use more. And so, obviously removing the addiction from your life allows one to try to find a new, that stability again in chemically in their brain. And also, if there's a natural dysfunction within the brain, psychiatry, medication can help in those things. And that's huge. And so I think there's definitely more than one way to get well. And so if sometimes, if AA doesn't resonate and people feel that that's their only option, it might give them a nihilistic viewpoint. It might make them think that I've only got this one way that I can do it, and since I can't do it, then I just have to resort back to what I knew worked for me. And that's obviously can be deadly.
Yeah. I think that's going back to what I said earlier. That's a tool. It's a tool, right?
Right.
And you're right. It doesn't address some of the key things. There's no mention of trauma. I think part of the opening is for those people that didn't follow our path, those were souls that couldn't be saved, right? Or, and something in those terms, right? And that actually always bothered me. It was saying you're overlooking just because your way, I choose a different path, doesn't make me wrong. I find it to be very judgmental, right? And I think if you're dealing with trauma, you're dealing with mental health issues, you know, you tell that to a soldier who has PTSD from military action, you know, and his brain's fight and flight response is, you know, totally off. And you tell him that, yeah, that's just doing the step work is going to save you, and go tell everybody that you're sorry for what you've done. And meanwhile, he's been in combat and seen his friends die. That's a pretty powerful statement to me to say, hey, you know, do it this way or don't do it at all. So, you know, I feel that judgmental side is an important thing to look at. I don't think it covers important issues. You know, it doesn't address withdrawal for the person who's a heavy drinker and, okay, just come in and stop and go to abstinence. Well, there's a lot of risk to that, right? We know that. We go to seizures and things like that. There's no talk of the medical side. There's no talk of nutrition, sleep, you know, fitness, all those components, right? It's just spirituality is a great tool. It's one of the 5 mountains that I look at for my clients, right? It's one of the important things, but it is not the only factor in somebody's recovery.
I totally agree. I think one of the other aspects is that depending upon how you get to an AA meeting initially, I think one of the greatest things is getting there with someone that you know, someone who's maybe on a similar amount of sobriety as you had, maybe even participating in an AA where there's a group of people that maybe are in an outpatient program that you're with where you attend together, because there's a relatability. Because I do find that depending upon which meeting you do attend, the relatability is subjective. I mean, you can sometimes walk into a room with people that you just don't jive with. And sometimes some of these meetings can be very cliquey. Where groups are so established that they have their own communities that unfortunately it's difficult to tap into, and there's no relatability in that regard. One of the other things that I think is important is that sometimes we need that one-on-one. We need that one-on-one with a counselor, with a therapist, with a psychiatrist, with a psychologist, just to be able to truly understand what's happening for ourselves, right? Because addiction recovery is a selfish event, but it's also, it's a self-care event. You are trying to take care of yourself. And I think that's is something, unfortunately, that AA times is lacking. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think, well, the click side and the groups, I think that one of the areas that I will see is that people will go in to the program, right? And you may not be able to relate to some of the meetings. I recall my recovery a little bit and going in, and there was just, I couldn't relate to somebody that was in their car sleeping and lost everything and, was in this trail of misery. It's just, I couldn't grasp that, right? And so I'd go to a lot of meetings and I would just listen, and I would get jaded a little bit and negative. And then some of the best advice I ever got was in a meeting too. So it's kind of showing that sometimes you just have to go and listen. I remember listening to a woman and she just shared, she was an executive, and everything that she thought she could do, she could solve every problem in the world that she had in a business world, but she couldn't solve this. And she kept on trying to solve it and rush it and rush it, rush it. And then one day she said to herself, I'm exactly where I need to be. And I tell myself that all the time. And I tell my clients to say that. Maybe you're exactly where you need to be. Let's not rush it. Let's let this develop. Let's slow ourselves down a little bit, right? So there's that opportunity to get great advice, right? There's opportunity. But I think that over and over again, you go in and you continually hear the negative sides and the stories. Mm-hmm. I don't need to be reminded of what I went through anymore. I know that, right? I need to be reminded of that I'm strong and that I'm resilient and that I'm powerful, right? So that I can take control of my life. And if I drink, I can't take control of my life. But if everything else, then I have some control of my life. And so, that message. And then I see that, some of the great people that we'll see in these meetings with 30 years sobriety, their judgment comes in and they're telling people they're wrong and they're telling the same story over and over again. And they really kind of, they start to cast this, well, you're wrong and you're negative and you're bad. And that judgment comes in and that click comes in. And now I don't feel good about myself. Right? I'll name my biggest problem with AA, period. And that is the fact that somebody that can be sober for 5 years and living a perfect life slips and has a beer, and he has to stand up in front of the group. And I think that we've lived in shame and guilt for so long, and to say I'm at zero again, I don't feel that anybody's at zero again. I think there's a sense of accountability. I understand it, but there's a huge sense of shame and guilt. And that shame and guilt drives people to drink a lot of times. It's a big underlying thing that they have. So I've always had a problem with that. I'm in day zero and everybody's looking at you. And I think that scares a lot of people away.
I completely agree with you. I know some individuals now that they're just like, frankly, I don't count days anymore, because at the end of the day, nobody's going to take that time away from you. You are so much wiser from the things that you've learned, and through recovery as well as just in abstaining, that sometimes there's a slip, but you can't have a slip without all that information and all that insight in your sobriety that that's going to rear its ugly head, right? And so kind of removing it. And again, there's also this notion too of just once an addict, always an addict. Well, I mean, if people are no longer drinking anymore, if they've been completely clean, are they really? I mean, sure, they have the ability for their brains to to go haywire if they start up again and they slip into that cycle of addiction again. But if they're living their best life and they are clean, they're not addicts anymore. They're not. I mean, there's definitely that perspective too.
Yeah. That's the stigma that goes with addiction, right? It's like you're always an addict. And, when people stand up, and my clients, I'll never have them say they're an alcoholic in treatment centers and things like that, because I feel it's a negative stigma. And so I ask them, well, I'm an addict. Well, I am an addict. That's great. And, but what's the perception in society? When you say that, what do you think of an addict? And they go, a loser, this and this. And I'm like, well, is that you? No, you're a person working on improving your life. You're a better version of yourself every day. And, I think it becomes, I want to remove that stigma, right? I want to remove that hidden in the basement mentality that they have. And let's talk about addiction out in front. There's some great organizations. One I want to share with you today for all of your people that are going to watch this, and that is the phoenix.org. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. But that is a recovery program that was started out of Colorado, and now it's serving, it's served probably 500,000 people. It's got locations throughout the United States. There's some things in the Bay Area, and it started in a CrossFit gym and mountain climbing, and it started with fitness, right? And it's grown that into a community with social support and things like that. It actually hosts conscious recovery. So you can go online and look at that on the phoenix.org, and you can see all of these different options ranging from meditation, yoga, all of these free services, right, that are broad. And I think that, in my eyes, it's taken what AA could be if it broadened its eyes and said, okay, the world is changing, access is changing. It's 1945. I understand the steps work. There's great fundamental tools, and I know a lot of sober people that should do the damn steps. Really, it's like, I know some people take some ownership in your life, and they'll work really well for you, and I love that, right? But I think we need to expand, and we need to touch today's society more and touch new people and continue to grow. And AA hasn't chosen to do that in a long time, and I think that's one of my biggest concerns is not treating the whole individual, not in treating, the family, it leaves the family. I know there's, Al-Anon, and I have some fundamental issues with Al-Anon sometimes, abandonment versus, in a time when somebody needs, don't enable and things like that. I understand. But I think that, you got to bring the family involved. They've got to understand the disease. We've got to have that therapy, one-on-one counseling. I don't think a sponsor is enough. I think a sponsor is somebody who's been trained in the steps, but maybe they don't know how to look at what trauma does. Yeah. They don't know what, how do you treat anxiety? Am I drinking because I have anxiety, or do I have anxiety because I'm drinking is a big question, what happens if you stop drinking, but you're still freaking out in the middle of the night? Guess what? You're eventually going to relapse. I don't care how many meetings you go to, you know?
Yeah. Good stuff. Yeah. I appreciate this, Kevin. Yeah. I think it really comes down to the individual is, having some trust and some faith that there are people that, first of all, that want to see you get better, that understand what it's like to be dealing with it, but also to be open to what your own recovery looks like and don't feel like you need to be set in any given way. You obviously operate your own practice, and I know that you have, some interesting ways in which you think about recovery. I'd like for you to, share that with us.
Sure. I look at recovery as a performance issue. I look at the disease aspect of it and understand that on a long-term basis, addiction is creating issues with the brain, neural network, things are changing, and fundamentally there are some disease characteristics to it. But I also look at it from a performance perspective. And what I see with a lot of the clients that I work with, they have learned faulty coping mechanisms in their lives. So, whether they've had trauma in their lives and their fight and flight response is totally out of whack, it's going haywire consistently. So they're constantly pumping out cortisol and adrenaline in the system. The heart rate's going, and the body just exhausts itself, and your only relief is a drink or a substance, right? It's the easy access to get that, right? So I need that dopamine spike. I need to be calmed down. I need that better feeling. It's the only relief I can get. So I want to work with clients and let them understand what their biology is. How is their body responding to certain types of activities and events, so that we can naturally raise dopamine levels, get them consistent, get those neurotransmitters better aligned. So I take a real close look at positive psychology, right? So, and from that, I'm looking at something called the flow state a lot, and that is the perfect alignment of neurotransmitters. So if you're doing something like writing a book or something like that, and you get into that groove, or you're doing a sport or athlete, and you kind of time and space disappears. That's about passion, right? It's about creating, that passion. I want my clients to identify what are they passionate about, what do they love to do, what are the rules of life. Why are they here on this earth, and really define those first as the fundamental step. And then I want them to look at, how does alcohol work with those? How does alcohol affect performance in your relationships? How does alcohol affect performance in your, in your physical feelings and your emotional state, right? What do you feel like the day after you drink? I'm depressed. I'm angry. I'm short-tempered. I won't be patient with my spouse. I won't be patient with my children. I'm not focused. I want them to understand those things, and then understand, hey, I can do things like meditation. I can do exercise. I can eat healthy. All these things are going to make me perform better. It's going to raise my level. So my minimal acceptable standard day when I'm drinking is way down here, right? Dopamine levels are low. Serotonin levels are low, right? We're depressed. We're unmotivated, right? And then our normal day, it's maybe we're making our bed at first. That's our big thing, right? That's our that's our kind of our low day, and then our average day. I'm going to try to raise everybody's low day to be what their average day is today. So in other words, increase how they live their life. Better at work, better family, more energy, that whole aspect. All related to, am I living by my code?
Kevin, that's great. For those that are listening that are interested in working with Kevin to become the best version of themselves, I'm going to definitely provide all of your contact information in the description below. And I definitely appreciate your time tonight going over this, because I think it's insightful. I think it's important. And I think at the very least, the goal is to continue to empower people to want to seek recovery, to want to get better, to want to understand, how they got there in the first place, what's happening chemically, and everything exterior in their life. So, Kevin, I appreciate it. You have yourself a wonderful evening, sir.
Thank you, Lindsay. Have a great night. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.